You ever see someone with massive toned arms but embarrassingly scrawny legs? Digimon Survive is a little bit like that person. It overwhelmingly succeeds at being an entertaining visual novel, but completely skips leg day when it comes to its tedious tactics combat. Apart from some serious pacing problems, meeting Digimon Survive's memorable characters and exploring the grim world they're stuck in makes the story at its center very enjoyable. But while this visual novel digivolves in the areas of storytelling and characterization, the mind-numbingly simplistic turn-based combat system crammed into it comes close to spoiling that otherwise enjoyable tale entirely. The glacial opening hours of Digimon Survive feature a group of quirky high school students who are sucked into a parallel world that's filled with Digimon. That'll be a familiar setup for any Digimon fan, but a much darker tone and a new cast of characters means that's where most similarities end. Digimon has always dabbled with dark themes, but what follows here is an unsettling tale filled with intense and traumatic backstories, physical and verbal abuse, psychotic episodes, betrayal, and gruesome deaths. All next to the usual colorful cartoon mascots who turn into sexy humanoids through the power of friendship. Hello, Tone Control Police? Yeah, I'd like to report a murder. The perilous story of Digimon Survive sees these students and their destined Digimon partners trying to survive the mysterious and dangerous world they now find themselves in, while searching for a way to return to their own. Unfortunately, they are also surrounded by evil and sadistic Digimon who are into killing children and monologuing about how much they like killing children in equal measure. It's a weird ride to be sure, but also one that's thoroughly enjoyable. And although it can be jarring at times, Digimon Survive does benefit from both its dark tone and the incredibly high stakes it sets. For example, characters can be killed off in horrifyingly gruesome ways because you didn't spend enough time developing a relationship with them. Naturally, this transforms them into the worst version of themselves, and their death is all your fault for being a bad friend. Those stakes work very well in a visual novel that puts its characters front and center, especially since the Digimon franchise has always leaned heavily on the saving the world through the power of friendship trope. This time, there's just a lot more murdering going on. As a visual novel first and foremost, Digimon Survive has you doing by-the-numbers activities like finding hidden objects and building up social links with your comrades. But the story around those things is pretty awesome. It's got some memorable characters, a unique setting, and more than a few neat twists and turns, though admittedly I saw many of its reveals coming from a mile away. You'll get to hang out with some likable, if a bit one-dimensional human companions like the level-headed mother hen Aoi and the talkative goofball Minoru, as well as the much more interesting Digimon characters like the ever-lovable Agumon and the surprisingly mature and stern Falcomon. Digimon Survive has got real storytelling chops at all the right times too, and the pivotal moments where it flexes them account for some of the adventure's best. The biggest problem with the story is that it moves at a snail's pace most of the time, with lots of meaningless filler padding out its chapters and characters who absolutely refuse to stop rehashing the same things over and over again. So much so that I was screaming, "I get it already!" at my television. The opening couple of hours in particular are so oppressively slow that it left an incredibly bad first impression, until things finally started developing down the road. But just as things did get going, the fun police would inevitably arrive to shove some needlessly drawn-out conversation down my throat. One section had me walking through the identical halls of a waterway to discover the same illusory figures repeatedly, which somehow fooled my character every time, naturally. While another had me bouncing back and forth between a handful of areas as I chased around a group of characters who would argue with me briefly before running off to be chased again. There's just a ton of wheel spinning that happens in between the otherwise interesting story developments, which bogs down the roughly 40-hour campaign. In between long stretches of visual novel gameplay, you'll slog your way through Digimon Survive's absolutely abhorrent tactics battles. It's some of the most bare-bones combat design I've ever seen from a tactics game. Each Digimon only has 2 moves, a standard attack and a signature move, enemies are samey and predictable, and the battle system doesn't evolve at all as you progress. In fact, there are so few factors to consider that practically no strategy was ever required of me beyond choosing my strongest Digimon and rushing at my opponent, even on harder difficulties. The result is a repetitive and painfully dull combat system that I found to be deeply offensive. I couldn't stand more than a minute of it at a time before sighing deeply and resigning myself to its cold, upsetting embrace. Which is unfortunate, because the genuinely worthwhile story is interrupted with these prolonged and crude encounters that often drag on for way too long. If you're hoping to add your favorite Digimon to your roster, a certain amount of grinding will be required too, and that means you'll need to subject yourself to this rudimentary and boring combat system on a regular basis. Digimon Survive uses a recruitment system that's similar to Persona 5, where you convince Digimon to join your team by answering seemingly pointless questions with equally meaningless responses to find the answers they like. If you correctly answer questions to a Digimon's satisfaction, then you get a percentage chance that they'll join your team, which in my case resulted in the Digimon running away about 80% of the time, causing me to have to seek them out and endure the combat system all over again. It's seriously one of the most frustrating experiences I've had in recent memory, and puts an extremely sour taste in my mouth during an adventure I would have enjoyed a great deal more if it wasn't included at all. In fairness, the developers did include plenty of options to make the painful combat less prickly, by letting you increase battle speed, turn off animations, and even use an auto battle option so you can just passively watch your Digimon duke it out. There's even a retry option if you're trying to catch a Digimon and fail due to RNG not going in your favor. Of course, with so many tools that enable you to speed up, skip through, or not engage with the combat system, it's pretty sad that so much effort has been put into allowing you to avoid playing half of the game at all costs. I would have much preferred if that effort would have been put into fleshing it out and making combat actually fun to play. There aren't many compliments I can offer Digimon Survive's combat, but one is that it satisfyingly rewards players who invest time in developing social links with the story's characters. That's because your affinity with a character determines the extent to which they're able to digivolve, meaning those you're closest with will be your most powerful allies on the battlefield. If you're like me and were hoping to spend as little time in that mess of a game mode, then this gives a huge incentive to spend time with your friends and make sure they're happy.
Sorry.
Digimon Survive is a standout visual novel wrapped around one of the worst turn-based tactics systems I've ever played. Even if there's a little too much filler padding out its length, the well-written story, charming characters, lovely visual style, and surprisingly dark tone are all great. But those strengths only sometimes manage to overcome a combat system that's so primitive and bland, it hardly warrants being called a tactics game at all, dragging everything Digimon Survive does well down with it. For more, check out our reviews of 2 Point Campus and Xenoblade Chronicles 3. For everything else, stick with IGN.